Okay, we're recording?
Yeah. Again.
Do you want to just check that it's recording?
It is. I mean, it definitely is.
Okay, we don't need to listen back. No, it's all good.
Can you introduce my podcast then?
Okay, sure. So this is a Britpop special podcast, and actually it's quite timely because a week or so ago was the 25-year anniversary since the Blur Oasis singles went head-to-head in the charts. So
you had an ulterior motive here?
A celebratory 25-year Britpop podcast. Britpop's one of those things where I kind of lived through it as a teenager and loved it, but it's one of the genres that is kind of a bit hated now. Like, people like to turn their noses up, you know. My brother and sister are classic, a bit younger than me. Oh, you know, Britpop. And
How
I
much
think
younger than you?
They're about one's 2 and one's 4 years younger. But my brother wasn't as, you know, he's kind of, you know, cool. He liked grunge and stuff, and you know, Britpop was kind of one of those genres that did get a bit kind of, I guess, taken the piss out of quite a lot. Even at the time. Yeah, even at the time, really.
It was huge.
It was kind of like, it was a bit like one of those slight social divide things. So at school you'd have like a lot of kind of dancey, charty music, and then all of a sudden kind of guitar bands were back in the charts.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it got compared a lot to like the 70s and stuff, because a lot of dads would say, oh, this has all been done before. Because I think a lot of that music hadn't gone away, but it wasn't so mainstream, you know. So all of a sudden, like, come the mid-90s, there were like indie bands all over magazines. There were new magazines just about indie bands. Indie bands were on the radio. There was a lot more gigs, and that was kind of one of the cool things to do. But there was also people who guitar bands, you know.
It's funny when you say like, oh, it sounds like what's our, you know, oh, we've heard it before, because obviously the main accusation is that Oasis sounds like the Beatles. I don't think it sounds anything like the Beatles, to be honest.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I mean that as both a defence of them and a criticism.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. No way as good, but equally maybe not as derivative, which was...
They sound more like T-Rex or something like that. They're more like that. And I know Noel Gallagher, I don't know tons about Britpop necessarily, but I know Noel Gallagher was a fan of T-Rex.
Okay,
and of like David Bowie and things like that. Because he was technically more of that generation of like the early 70s and the late 60s.
Yeah.
And I've definitely read that he was like into that.
Okay, so yeah.
I don't know, they don't even sound that much like T-Rex necessarily, but it's more like straight ahead rock and roll like that than it is like the Beatles.
Than it is like the Beatles. Maybe it's because they were quite. I mean, I think they used to talk about the Beatles. I mean, the other comparison.
And also
was
they used to the fucking
the
glasses
styling,
and the hair. Like, it was their own fault.
All of that stuff. And I suppose, you know, for me, like, the most derivative band of the Britpop scene is like a band like Ocean Colour Scene, who just kind of...
I know the name. I probably
I didn't put them... they do that...
Oh, that's called Riverboat, isn't it? Which is also the name of my song.
Exactly. You've eclipsed it.
Oh, yeah, well.
I never thought of that before, that it's...
No, I remember once, you know, when you're like, has someone else taken the name of this song?
Yeah.
It's a common name, isn't it?
Yeah,
and I was like, oh shit, this song.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I know this song as well. And
yeah.
It's a big song.
Yeah.
Our song, for anyone listening, is very different though.
It is very different. And I didn't hate Ocean Colour Scene, but they are probably one of the most derivative bands. And the other thing that used to get levelled at Blur is that they sounded like the Kinks. So if you take the kind of big band at the time,
which they don't.
You know, they don't, but I do get the subject matter. Yeah, the sort of exactly. But they don't really sound like them. But I think that I can see why people make the comparison.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was like all of a sudden guitar music was everywhere, you know, and I think for a lot of people it was a real scene, you know, and it was great fun. But it's one of those things that I guess maybe like perhaps like any sort of popular period of time, it's sort of, you know, people then look back and say, oh, you know, and sort of do it down a bit and down some of the bands, because it did. I suppose like any popular movement, it kind of becomes a bit of a parody of itself. Like you've got these bands who ended up looking like they were just, you know, they were just aping other bands, and so
and to be fair, there were probably lots of bands who did jump on, unimaginatively jump on the bandwagon. For
sure. And it seemed like, you know, the uglier you were and the worse you could play your guitar, the better by the end of it, you know.
Yes, so that is part of my image of it. And it's interesting what you said before about like your brother was part of the cool scene and thought it was uncool. Like my like experience of people who are into Britpop are people who think they're really cool, and they have a very, it's almost like the most stereotypical 90s version of cool. Like, it's not cool to care. Like I know so many people who like that, who are really into Britpop, and it does sully the image of it a bit.
I can see that, and I think, you know, there's different things, isn't there? There's kind of living through something, enjoying it, looking back and being like, you know what, I stand by that. That was a good that was a good album, that was a good album. And yeah, there was some rubbish, which I guess I like to think I'm in that camp. But there are other people for him, and you get this again with all kind of times of music. Some people just don't move on today. So I think there's probably a certain class of people now who would still, because they have these kind of revival festivals, and there's certain people who probably still go along with, you know, their Oasis teachers. Say, oh, this is the best it was. But, you know,
can I just briefly say, like, put into your mind as well, and I think this is an accurate image to some degree of like a 40-year-old man who still has the Noel Gallagher haircut, who still dresses like he's 24 and it's still 1997. That's quite. I've seen it. So even in, like, and it's so stereotypical in Manchester. There seems to be a lot of men, like late 30s, early 40s, who still just think it's 1997 in Manchester.
Well, there's just a lot of. I mean, obviously, Oasis are from Manchester. I know you know that. I'm saying it for the sake of the podcast, in case there's anyone who doesn't know that Oasis is from Manchester.
Can I do want to say one more thing. I remember being a kid, really liking the Beatles, and I think when I was probably one of these obnoxious teenagers who was always like, music at the moment, music. Don't say that. I didn't even give you the details, and you were immediately like, yeah, no, I can see that.
I'm just joking.
No, but like, it's one of those things. Like,
you pretty much told me that you were like, yeah, this is my music, like it or hate it.
No, but I think at the time, and I stand by it. Like, so you know, I was born in 1990, so most people, and I was similar, really like started getting into music when you were about 12, 13, 14. And when 2003, 2004 was crap for music, and I still stand by that. Not that there wasn't good music being made somewhere in the world, but for someone who doesn't really have great access to the internet, and no one really did back then, you're not going to find the more underground artists, especially if you're not an adult, you're a teenager. And everything that was in the charts was either, to be fair, I'm not going to say hip hop and stuff like that's crap, which is not my thing, but guitar music was awful, just uninteresting. I still to this day do not like Blink-182 or anything like that. I don't like that kind of tepid indie crap.
Yeah, well, we were talking about, we were exchanging an article about landfill indie and stuff earlier on. But yeah, so I suppose that's the difference, is that when I was exactly that age, there was all this great guitar music out there. There were all these amazing bands, you know, and some of them were on the playlist, and there were some mediocre bands kind of, you know, trying to kind of follow and copy that, but there were some amazing bands. And it was really exciting to be that age and to have like all these, you know, bands that you liked and gigs that you could go to with your friends and stuff like that all happening, and you know, to go along and see Pulp, who were an amazing band, you know, at that age, you know, it was really exciting, and to have all this stuff that was happening. And so and you're right, you know, I think a lot of good guitar music had been around always before that, but you had to seek it out. Whereas there it was in your face with a lot of other stuff crowding it out as well.
I was going to say that the story before that I completely forgot to finish was that my friend, I remember he came into school, I mean, we must have been 14, 15, and he was like, listened to Radio 1 yesterday, and they said the greatest band from Manchester is Oasis. And I was like, what? Like, how is this anything to do with me? Why are you saying this to me? He's like, it's Oasis, not a certain other band you love. And I was like, what? Who's from Manchester that I love? And he was like, you know. I was like, do you think the Beatles were from Manchester? And he was like, well, where were they from? Liverpool.
Oh my goodness.
And it was just like,
when you live as far north as you grew up, though, is it a bit like when you live in the south and people are like, oh, it's all the same above Birmingham? Is it the same there? Like, it's all the same beneath Lancaster.
I mean, like, we still joke about it. Like, if it's not Preston, it's the south. But like, in all seriousness, like, growing up in Carlisle, I don't think most of us realised how provincial we were. We just didn't really think about it. Like, London in a way was just like another town down south. And not until, I mean, I went when I was a teenager at some point, but probably more like 17 or something. And I mean, I'm still not that keen on London necessarily, but like, we just didn't really, we were so provincial, we didn't even know we were provincial. That's it was. And it was like Liverpool, Manchester, kind of the same thing. And everything was just like, pfft.
But you know, making a link back to Britpop, small towns and stuff, you know, a lot of these bands they toured local places, you know, so bands were coming to Brighton, which was near us, and even sometimes Hastings, where I'm from, like Ash played at the Crypt in Hastings, and it was a really exciting time. And I suppose that's for me, like, when there is this kind of snobbery, and I'm calling it snobbery, I suppose I'm kind of chucking that out there as kind of quite a sort of you know, bit of a later term, but I think there is a bit of that, you know. People now, if you talk about Britpop, it's always with a bit, you know, and even amongst people of my age who were there and really loved it. And people do that cherry picking thing where they say, oh, I love Suede, but they're not a Britpop band, or I love this band, but they're not a Britpop band. And you're like, yeah, they're part of that, and they might have been the leading and the best of that, but they're still part of it, and you can't untangle that from everything else. I'm quite a proud defender of it, but I'm really interested to sort of hear about what you liked, and so I put a playlist together. And just to caveat it, I put stuff there, all stuff that I like, but some stuff that I appreciate is more like critically good than some of the other stuff on there. So
I just kind of want to lead as well, just the final contextualization of where I'm coming from, I guess, because like as I said before, I felt like everything at the time in terms of rock music, and I still stand by it, was crap. And then I didn't really start to get into music. You know, when you're a kid, like, you listen to whatever your parents listen to. My mum listened to a lot of what I still consider very, very good music. The Beatles, Bob Marley, The Cause. To be fair, I don't have a strong opinion on them necessarily. I can't even, like, remember many of their songs. I just remember my mum listened. You know, like Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, like, a lot of stuff like that. And also my mum's, like, she's not into music massively, like, as a hobby or anything, but she's a huge fan of, like, Yes, which when I found out when I got into Yes, I was like, what? And I don't think you really get into music until you, like, get into it yourself. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I was like, yeah, the Beatles are great, or whatever. Bob Marley's great, but I never got into that. So when I heard that as a child and heard everything else that was, like, in the charts at the time and it was accessible to me as a, like, 13, 14-year-old, I just thought everything was crap, because obviously it was nowhere near as good as what I was already listening to at home. Yeah. And I wasn't going to get into that because it was my mum's music. Yeah. It wasn't until I hit, like, 14, 15 that my brothers and I just started going to the library and just copying all the CDs, because you rent it for, like, a week for, like, 50p, and you just copy it all. And I realised, like, this is why I got really into, like, progressive rock. Like the original 70s British stuff, none of that 80s.
Yeah, the compilation, the prog rock compilation.
Yeah, it was great. And I realised that music could be, like, exciting and playful and, like, colourful. Like, it was almost like the first time I heard in Technicolor. It was like that moment in The Wizard of Oz where she goes from Kansas to Oz. Yeah. And, like, everything I was hearing at the time on the chart was, you know, that sepia tone. And I heard, like, Roundabout for the first time and this keyboard, and I was just like, I don't know what the hell that is, but I like it. So that's the kind of context where I came from. So when I kind of, like, went back, and I've not gone in depth in Britpop before, it kind of just sounded like more of the stuff I heard as a teenager. Yeah. And then I'd already got into, like, tons of really flamboyant 70s stuff. And
which is really different from...
And it's hard. It can feel like you're going back to a sepia world. So, you know what I mean? That was kind of my baseline. And, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I'm generally, like, there are some things I'm going to say through this about the Britpop songs that might sound massively pejorative. Yeah. And I don't necessarily mean it that way. If I really hate a song, I will say it. Yeah. But there's a few, like, general statements. Like, I'm just going to get I feel like it's, as a genre, it kind of elevates the pedestrian. It's like, and the elevate thing, I'm putting in there to be nice. It feels it's a very pedestrian genre, and I don't inherently mean that as a pejorative thing. It's about everyday things. Yeah. Isn't it? And it's about... It
puts that at the forefront rather than it elevates it. It's kind of, Couldn't you say that the Beatles and the Kinks do the same thing? That they elevate this tune, you know?
To some degree, I mean, like...
to some degree. You know, da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm not saying that's a slag mob.
No,
maybe that's one of the things that...
Which specific song that was. Which Beatles song is that? Lady walking down the street, da-da-da.
I was thinking about Penny Lane. Penny Lane. It wasn't Charlie Boy.
I was talking to Karen about Penny Lane the other day, and I think that is one of the best... I mean, like, this isn't a podcast about the Beatles, and they're not underrated, so it's not the topic. But, like, that is... Paul McCartney, I like to rip on him a lot, but Penny Lane is fucking brilliant. Yeah, lyrically, maybe not. But I guess the difference is Britpop, and again, I don't mean this as a pejorative way, is musically pedestrian and lyrically. Okay, and pedestrian, and maybe isn't the right word, because it is a more pejorative term than maybe I'm reaching for, but it's not artsy for the most
But then maybe that is where the similarities are. And I'm kind of maybe going on about this a bit, but maybe that is some of the similarity that actually the Beatles music, some of it obviously is a lot more complex, but there is a lot of really accessible kind of music, 3-4 chords stuff in the Beatles and the Kinks and Blur and Oasis. And maybe it's not a coincidence that it does, it's not sort of trying to put, it's not pretentious, and it did, both of those things reached a lot of people, and created a lot of, so maybe that's a similar.
Yeah, and I don't want to like fetishize too much like complex music for the sake of it. Do you know what I mean? It's. But the Beatles, even from their first album, were doing very like harmonically complex and involved stuff.
Yeah, they
do you know what I mean?
Complex than that.
But I don't want to like lean too heavily on that. And I think the main point of comparison between like the British invasion and Britpop is it was just like British resurgence of music. That's all it really was. And the aesthetics of what people wore.
The style stuff around the edge.
But so that's a long diversion of me to say. I'm going to say things that sound pejorative, but I'm trying to phrase it in a way that isn't.
That's okay.
But if I'm going to, I had an order in which I would like to talk about the songs.
Yeah, of course. Go
Starting, I kind of want to get the crap ones out of the way first.
Okay, fine.
There was only one that I had a really strong reaction to against. Is it dickish of me to ask you to guess which one that might be?
I think it might be the Supernatural Smile.
No, it wasn't that one actually. No.
Okay, then.
I'll just say it. There's too many to guess. Supergrass.
Oh really? Okay. And I'm really sorry because that was a last minute addition, and I forgot. Caught by the Fuzz. Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, this podcast is about underrated music, and I want to keep it positive, so I don't want to stay too long on this, but it does everything that I really hate in music.
Yeah.
And I say this to people all the time. The easiest way to turn me off from a song is to start by
okay.
I just don't do that. I mean, I shouldn't say don't do that. I'm not like the objective arbiter of music, but it turns me off immediately.
Why is that?
Because you just it's completely undynamic. It's just hitting the chord on every beat of the song or every quarter beat. It feels like you could do anything, and my standards aren't super high. You could just do like the simplest thing, and just mix up that in the easiest way. And another thing is hearing a melody that just doesn't sound like it's actually being composed. Like you've spent no time on that. You're just saying things. And the lyrics, and the third thing is opening a song with a terrible lyric.
Okay. Caught by the Fuzz. Well, I was still on a buzz. I don't think that's a good lyric.
No, I mean, again, my standards aren't super high. I'm not really like a lyrically oriented person.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna like a song because the lyrics are good, but I might dislike a song because I think the lyrics are bad.
Yeah.
So for me, like, it's why I'm never going to be the biggest fan of Bob Dylan in the world. I do like Bob Dylan, but there are so many songs that people tell me are a classic, like Visions of Johanna, and it's just not working on me because it's lyrically brilliant, and I don't really care that much.
Okay.
So do you know what I mean? If something's lyrically brilliant, I'm not really going to notice unless I already love the music. But if something's lyrically bad, I will be put off. So I was put off by the lyrics, and I think the main thing was that I've never liked that, and it's the easiest thing in the world to not do that, and it's just kind of a wall of sound. The bass is the drums are and the guitar is just, and I guess hearing songs like that is why I'm not into punk really. Like I do like some punk, do you know what I mean?
It's quite simplistic, isn't it? It makes me want to ask actually whether you like their big hit. Do you know their big hit? You must know their big hit.
Which is way better than this song. Way because like you listen to it and like, well, they've actually composed the melody.
Yeah,
and it didn't
piano part's great.
Yeah. And the bass, for like, it's a perfect example because the piano is quite like just insistent and on the beat.
Yeah.
But the bass line is doing something different.
Yeah.
And it's the smallest thing in the world.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm sure I've said this to people and they're just like, why do you care so much about this? But I don't know why. Maybe it's because I started off as a bass player, and I don't think I've ever in my life just played on the bass, and it's a very
and if you did, it'd be quite boring to play that.
It's really boring to play, but it's a very stereotypical bass guitar kind of thing to do, and bass like indie pop thing, and I was just never hate that. It immediately turns me off.
Interesting.
So I do think the other Supertramp song, which is probably the only one I know, All Right. It's called All Right, isn't it? Sorry, I don't know why. Do I keep saying?
No. I think that's the first time.
I keep doing it because Karen kept doing it, and I was like, no, they're very different. I love Supertramp.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like that as a stylistic thing.
Yeah, but that's interesting that you did like All Right. So there's something about that kind of this band, kind of youthful, you know, joie de vivre. This kind of, and I suppose that's it's you know, you talked about music being playful earlier, and I remember me and my friend Becky, you know, who was my kind of big like Britpop friend, you know, and you know that. You can imagine two sort of 15-year-olds, if only your mother could see it now, you know. Yeah. Not that I ever ended up in a police cell for taking drugs, spoiler. But yeah, so it's that kind of youthful, exuberant kind of.
I mean, like I don't love the song All Right. To me, it's similar to the song Smile.
Yeah.
In that it's like my association with it is primarily. It's a 90s song that was used in lots of adverts.
Yeah. Did you know the song Smile? When you heard it, did you?
I didn't know it until the chorus, and the chorus hit, and I was like, I've heard this. You know when you have a memory, but you don't know where from?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's been in adverts, or it's been in something
kind of
like
thing.
that.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that later, because it's a song I like more.
Okay. So I'm surprised, but I'm not that surprised, and I'm not that, like... upset, you know. There's a couple of songs on this list. If they had been that, I would have been like, whoa. But anyway.
Well, let's see.
Next one.
So Angel Interceptor immediately triggered me for a similar reason, like it does a similar thing, but all the way through the song it's actually a lot better.
Yeah.
I still think it opens with, it's got some terrible lyrics. It's got some awful lyrics, so really bad.
Tim Wheeler, he's a terrible one, but like his favourite subject is basically like, you know, being in love with a girl and, you know, in the school. So, because I think it's one of the really young bands, like, you know, I know what bands are, but, you know, it's often about, like, you know, there she was with her, you know, cells on.
I mean, bad lyrics don't come down to bad lyrical subject matter.
Maybe I should, you know, I didn't want to go too, like, obvious with the playlist because I thought, well, you might be like, I've heard this before, but, you know, their big hit was obviously Girl From Mars. Which did...
Obviously. I don't know it. I don't think I know
I could have put Girl From Mars on there. So that's much more sort of... I think the lyric was something which people really liked on that because it was, do you remember the time when you were Girl From Mars? I don't know if you knew that. So that's their sort of most famous one. But yeah, so I didn't put their sort of... But anyway, I think it's a great song. I've never noticed the lyrics actually.
I stayed in last night. I wasn't feeling all right. It's not only that they're really banal. Again, the pedestrian. It's just the way like he elongates it to such a point that I can't help but pay attention to the sheer banality of it. Like it's not the lyrical subject matter. Any lyrical subject matter is fine. Like it doesn't matter if it's about the most trite thing.
Yeah.
Just
make an effort.
I felt like that's a thing that really annoys me about the song, and it really annoyed me about the Supergrass song. It felt low effort.
Yeah.
And low effort, again, people take piss on me because sometimes I use it as a criticism quite often. But it really, if I feel something's low effort, it does annoy me. It just...
That's interesting because my feeling with lyrics is similar to yours in that if it's a great song, it's not going to bother me. I just kind of, I find it quite secondary. Like I notice it if I love it, and it's quite rare for something to annoy me that much. Like if the tune's good, I don't really care if they write the lyrics at the last minute. Really, but that's partly because I think it's quite hard to write lyrics. I think that's why that's why I would respect it and not respect it, but that's why I kind of, you know, I'd forgive bad lyrics because I don't think I could do any better. Whereas you know, with music, you kind of think actually that's too boring and
but I didn't. Well, in neither the Supergrass song nor the Ash song, Angel Interceptor.
Yeah.
Well, we should probably. We didn't pause for me to insert the songs. No. I might not do it, I don't know. Okay. The first one was, what was it called? Caught by the Fuzz by Supergrass.
Yeah.
The second one was Angel Interceptor. Interceptor by Ash.
Yeah, but you like the melody of that one?
No, I was going to say I don't think there's much of a melody to massively say that. But like Angel Interceptor was a more interesting song. Like, there's a bit at the end where it was Angel Interceptor. And like, oh, it picks up and there's like some guitar harmonies.
Yeah.
They're Irish, aren't they? It sounds a bit Thin Lizzy, so I don't know whether they were into that or like the Iron Maiden kind of. It sounds almost like it's much more like simple, and it's just there right at the end. I'm like, oh, it picks up, and then it ends. Why would they do that?
Yeah.
But it shows that
they could have gone on for another 10 minutes in that vein.
Not necessarily. But like, it was a better song, but I would never listen to it again.
Both three pieces as well, actually, which is interesting because I think if we were in therapy right now, we could go into the issues of three pieces, and maybe they're not complex enough. I don't want to sort of be too saying that you don't like things because they're not complex. I know that's not what you're saying, but it's interesting that, like, for example, I know, like, if there's a lot of, like, we talked about like keyboards and but anyway, I just thought they're both three pieces. They've both got that kind of da 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 drums, guitar, bass, kind of simple. You can imagine maybe this is unfair to three pieces, but them being thrown together a bit more, like, come on, let's have a mate who plays a bass and let's da 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 da.
At the end of the day, there's enough overdubs on this that it's effectively not a three piece, because it's definitely electric guitar harmonies, so he's overdubbed it. If it's just one dude, he's overdubbed it.
But I think being a three piece probably does do something to how you write music. I don't know.
It's hard to say. There are plenty of solo artists who manage it by themselves, you know what I mean? And three between them couldn't scrape together anything better than that. I am getting mean now. Like, I'm getting mean now. They were the main two that, like, Angel Interceptor I came around to a bit more, but I'm never going to listen to it again, mainly because the lyrics just annoyed me. And Supergrass, I keep saying Supergrass, I thought it was irredeemable. I have to be blunt. And the third one that was kind of lower down the class still does kind of the same thing of the dinner, but it was a bit more interesting. And to be honest, I don't have negative feelings towards this song. It's just not really my kind of thing. And it was Nancy Boy.
Okay.
I don't even say it sounds homophobic. But by Placebo. I didn't like it.
Well, that was a massive. Sorry, yeah.
No, so I didn't like this one, but this is just so obviously not my thing that do you know what I mean? Like, grungy kind of. Yeah. It's just not my thing, so I can't really be that against. I feel like it's just.
I see what you mean.
It's a different category to what I'm interested in.
One of the things I would say about that song, and this is what I kind of mentioned earlier, is it's very much of that scene. Like, oh my goodness, there's one subsequent Placebo song with the most terrible lyrics, which I'll have to play sometime. But the thing with that is it was that one song was one of those. You get these kind of hits that just as soon as you go out to clubs, they're the song that everyone's on the dance floor, and it was like that. So I guess for me, it's reminiscent of indie club nights. That comes on, and it's a great song to dance to. It's a great song when it's really loud. And everyone kind of throwing themselves. Even like guys you would normally dance, like that just gets everyone on the dance floor. So it kind of makes me think of that time. And Brian Molko was kind of, I guess, similarly to like Damon Albarn and Tim Wheeler and Ash. There was these kind of real kind of pretty sort of male singer, and that was quite a big part of Britpop actually. Was the sort of, there were some really like ugly bands in some ways, like Oasis. They were channeling this sort of
yobbish,
sort of in the kind of hair, but in other ways they were Liam Gallagher's a good looking guy, especially I think he did look great then, and there was a lot of that. I do think the sort of fanciful male singer was quite a thing on that, and Brian Molko with his kind of slightly androgynous kind of looks and his eyeliner, his guyliner, was sort of. It's also, I think, part of Britpop, and it's part of something that makes something. Yeah, it's a scene, isn't it?
But it's funny, like that kind of androgynous, even into the territory of like cross-dressing. It's such like a British thing as well. Like the first huge kind of global comedy group, Monty Python, cross-dressed to every opportunity. Glam rock was all about, like, it's strange that like we were a nation of like uptight people, like stereotypically, and it's from a history of like music hall and all that kind of thing, isn't it? But there's always been a history of like glammy British kind of. I don't really have anything sophisticated to say on it, other than it's a weirdly British thing. Yeah,
and it makes me think as well again about the sort of reminiscent of the sort of 60s and 70s and stuff, because it actually it makes me think about how this time in music was a connection point for me and my dad, because he loved Beatles and Stones and Kinks, and he had a lot of records and stuff, and we never would have thought to really listen to his music much. I mean, we used to play Beatles and stuff, but I remember him playing me Lola, and there's probably some of that of being like, oh look, this song's about this, and him being like, well, listen to this song, and I remember him at the time lending me like, listen to this Kinks, this Kinks best of, if you like that, listen to this, and seeing some of those parallels, but also he would he would enjoy the Britpop stuff as well.
Yeah. I think the Kinks are a stronger link between the British invasion and Britpop than the Beatles were, personally. And it's mainly through the whimsical kind of thing. But yeah, we don't need to lead on that. But Nancy Boy just wasn't my kind of thing. But it still does the and I like. I think there's back to what I was saying before, like the pedestrian thing. Like I think every single singer in here they're not singing in like they're not they're singing obviously, but it's almost they're putting effort in to not making it look like they're putting effort into singing.
And that was something that I felt when I put the playlist together would probably annoy you, and I wasn't sure exactly how to put it. You've summed it up better there, so I won't really say much more on it, but it's a sort of mimicking something. So at its worst, I think it's really putting something on. And Damon Albarn does that in some of the later like country house era Blur, which is quite annoying and put a lot of people off. But I know what you mean, the sort of sense of almost deliberately trying not to sing well.
But also there's much more by this, because again, and I know we said we didn't want to compare it too much to the British invasion kind of stuff, but the Beatles rarely sang with the Scouse accent. They sometimes did, and it was very clear that they were putting it on to really like emphasize the point. And the Rolling Stones sang with a fake American accent. Even into the 70s, T-Rex, Elton John, the best example of a British artist singing with a fake American accent. The Kinks weren't actually very big by the time they started singing properly with a British accent. They'd like commercially basically destroyed themselves. But like Britpop, people are much more keen to emphasize that this is our accent and like I'm from London or I am Northern or whatever it was. And part of me is like, that's a really good thing, but also part of me thinks like, I wish they would just have like a little bit more artistry to it. I don't know why, like I'm a bit of a sucker just for like more classicals. No, I don't mean classical singing like the genre, but do you know what I mean? Like when someone's like, I am singing now. And I think that's one of the things that put me off about alt, like into like 90s, noughties and like that kind of indie scene where it's a good point. I'd never thought of it like that, but you're absolutely right. I think it's a really good point. I'm a sucker for the Beach Boys, and they're like they sing with very strong Californian accents, so it's probably not a good example, but do you know what I mean? Like when they're singing, they're putting on a singing thing, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? They're not trying to be like talky.
It makes me think of, is it Justin Hayward? Because you're not here.
Yes,
It's just singing it really nicely. And,
I don't necessarily want people to sing pleasantly. There are lots of singers who are quite unpleasant.
So that's quite a difficult brief. It's like, sing pleasantly, but make sure don't necessarily sing pleasantly, but do sing in a way that's true singing. It's quite. I guess most people, if they were making an effort, would sing pleasantly. But I like the idea of an Oasis song that was sung pleasantly. Actually, there was a. Anyway, I'll come back to that.
I guess it's almost like. It's almost like the theatre of music. I think to some degree, it's like, in my mind, I kind of want the singer to be singing a character almost. And it sounds like I want people to be disingenuous or something, but I just feel like it's almost like a step away from just...
Comes back to making an effort, right?
I guess it's hard to like make it concrete. Do you know what I mean? I'm trying to talk through my thoughts. To the effort thing, it comes back to like the impression I've got sometimes of like that guy who's now like 40 years old who's still really into Britpop, who I associate it with like the kind of person who thinks it's cool to not care. And I think that's a common attitude, and I don't know, amongst people I've met, not even necessarily people who like Britpop, but it's an attitude in people I don't like.
And you're kind of hearing a bit of that in...
And I don't think it's fair sometimes. I'm kind of projecting sometimes because I just assume that based on their accent and like, do you know what I mean? But to some, I think Britpop has that air about it, like... It's almost a cliche about the 90s, isn't it? Like, the slacker generation, Generation X. Like, I'm kind of like spouting boomer cliches in a way.
A little bit.
A lot. I think a lot of that music.
It's an aesthetic, though, right?
Yeah, a lot of these bands consciously adopted that.
A bit like the kind of surfer kind of thing as well. It's a bit slacker, isn't it? But yeah. So who did you like more? Who's next? Who's
so
kind
we're
of out
getting
of
now
like,
into the middling bit where I was like, again, probably not my kind of thing, but now I'm going to be honest, I do kind of get mixed up with some of these songs.
Okay.
So I need to make sure that they're in front of me. So, Stars by Dubstar.
Okay, yeah.
I think was the one that as soon as I put it on, I was like, has Katy given me the wrong playlist? Because this sounds like an Ibiza chill classic.
Right. Yeah. Well, but some people.
Is that the track that I'm thinking of?
Yeah. We'll take our hearts outside.
But it's the intro. It's that intro is very like. Yeah.
So Dubstar are one of my all-time favourite bands, and I think probably of everything on that list, you know, they are. Yeah. I just love them. They are definitely in Britpop.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people, I think, wouldn't necessarily associate them. So I come back to my sort of my guide of, you know, would they've all been on a like a band lineup together or been in the same magazines, and definitely Dubstar were in there.
Right.
But I think a lot of people who really love indie bands didn't necessarily love them, and I think there's probably a slight gender thing here. So there was many more male-fronted bands as usually the case in Britpop, but there were some female-fronted bands who also got quite a lot of, you know, kind of prominence and airplay, and there's people like Echo Belly and Sleeper who are more indie kind of bands, and Elestica who are also on the list. But Dubstar, one of those ones, female-fronted, and I love the lyrics actually. All of their stuff, I think it's great. It sort of takes women's views as the, you know, it's a very kind of female, particularly the lyrics are quite specific. Right, I think some of those other bands like Elestica are just writing kind of, you know, a rock song or an indie song, but with Dubstar she's much more singing about a female experience.
I was just going to say, I think this was a song where there were a few lines where it sounded like she was going to go into a really cliched rhyme, and then just like avoid it. I was like, good. I was like, in my head I was immediately like, that's just even if I wasn't really paying attention to what it meant. Yeah. But I was just like, it's nice when someone does that.
I think
it's a tiny little thing sometimes like that, where I was like, it's a welcome change from lots of just any, like, even when I write lyrics, you're like, this needs to rhyme, or like stupid things like that. You get caught in it, and
just kind of almost catching them out a bit. And I suppose the other difference with them is they've got like keyboards, they're quite electronic, and most pop music wasn't very electronic. So I think that's probably the thing that makes people not necessarily associate them as a very Britpop band. But I think of it in terms of the scene that they are part of. It came out at that time, and I just love them. So I wanted to put one of their songs on there. They've only got a couple of albums, and they had another one more recently, but. I think they're a terrible band name, I think, but great band.
It's not a good name. It's not. It doesn't suit the music either, really.
It's just a bit. I don't know.
But it's funny when you think about like good and bad band name. Like the Beatles is a terrible band name.
Yeah.
It's just a common pun at the time to name yourself after an animal, like the crickets, but they just spelt it wrong, like the drum, like a drum beat. It's like that's a terrible, awful name.
Yeah, but it works.
But because they're big enough that it becomes good. Oasis is not a good name, is it? But. It's probably not as bad, but there's no such thing really as a good band name.
But it does stand out a bit. It's a bit grating, I think.
Dubstar.
But on the naming thing, we tried to start a band. We didn't really start a band. Me and my sister and my friend Becky, we thought, we'll start a band, you know, and we called ourselves Marina. You know, sort of like, we'll go with something else. Water.
Okay, right. So, oh my god.
Yeah, but I think we only practiced once in the Baptist church where my dad worked. But anyway.
Hey, well, I was in the band when I was a teenager. We used to just hang out at someone's house and just go to the corner shop and just buy food and drink.
Yeah, well there you go.
And it was just what did we think? And then a few months later, we're like, we're not any better at these songs. Like, we were like, why aren't we any better yet?
Not like Between the Breaks where we get better every time and don't go to the corner shop. Sometimes when we go to your house.
It's true.
Dubstar, okay, well let's move on from that.
I don't necessarily have much more to say. Like it was again, like once we get into this territory, I'm like, oh, you've actually got a melody.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You've actually put a bit more effort. You're not just going do.
Yeah, and that was a big hit, that song, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there's space. Like, I guess sometimes when I say, and when people think that I only like complex music, sometimes it's about leaving space. And going on guitar doesn't leave any space.
Yeah.
And that can be fine for a bit of a song or for like an effect, but when you're doing it for an entire song, it gets a bit tired.
Yeah.
Unless you're doing something, do you know what I mean? But the song, it opens up, it's got space.
Yeah.
Didn't love it, but it's just not my kind of thing necessarily. But
didn't hate it.
Yeah, I feel like once we're in this territory of songs, I'm like, these are actual songs.
Yeah.
These are proper songs.
Good. That's good.
And then Waking Up by Elestica.
Yeah.
And I think this was a really good contrast again to because you had one guitar coming in doing something a bit like that, but then another guitar coming in on like the left channel versus the right channel, like playing a riff. And again, not the most complex riff in the world, but tiny things like that get me much more interested.
Yeah.
That was
variation.
Yeah. And again, like the song continued in a similar vein of being far better than everything else that I've mentioned so far.
Yeah.
But again, it's just we're still in a territory of it's just not quite.
Not like grabbing you in an amazing way.
Yeah, I'm probably never going to listen to it again, but.
So Elestica were a big Britpop band. Partly, not that this is an unfair thing, but partly they were known in that scene because she was Damon Albarn's long-term girlfriend, Justine Fishman. But she also used to go out with Brett Anderson, who was the lead singer of Suede. So sometimes people would knowingly say about Britpop trying to be clever, it's not Blur and Oasis that are the real rivals, it's Blur and Suede because Justine used to go out with Brett Anderson.
You definitely said that before, haven't you? You were definitely one of those people.
I think I probably did. Yeah, I think I probably did. So there you go. But so they were kind of.
So you're saying Britpop's a bit incestuous
in that group? Yeah, exactly. In that incestuous sort of bubble, they were in there, and they one of the things they were criticised for was kind of copying other people's music in a sort of arrogant, youthful way. So there's a song they've got called Connection, which is a great song. Down, 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 down. And then you listen to the song by do I want to say Wire? The Wire? What
I don't know.
Wire.
Band
called Wire.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, they completely ripped it off in that way they probably like no one will have heard of this before. Actually, she's quite posh. No one would have heard of this before.
Oh really?
Yeah. So
But it's funny because even what, like that riff you were just kind of humming and tapping at the same time, like. Those are two different things.
Yeah.
That, again, not massively different. You can do the two at once.
Yeah.
But it's so much more interesting than.
Yeah.
So, that genuinely, I'm not exaggerating here. It triggers me when I hear that. Immediately, like my brain just switches off and I go into like I don't like the song mode.
Yeah. Okay. So that's explaining why some stuff. I think. Yeah, that's interesting. I thought that there's a couple of songs I thought might be a bit further down your list. So let's carry on. I'm keen to hear what's next.
Anything now I mentioned, I liked on some level. And to be fair, actually, even the last three songs I mentioned, if I heard them, I could probably sing along with them. And do you know what I mean? It would be that level of enjoyment, but I would never choose to.
Yeah.
These ones, will I ever listen to them again? I don't know, but I could.
Yeah.
And On by...
The Longpigs.
Which is... Again, terrible name for a band.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've heard it before. Again, it's one of the songs I have no memory of having heard it, but I'm sure I've heard it.
Yeah.
It's a bit more folksy, so I like that.
Yeah, okay.
The intro of it sounded exactly like... just the guitar bit sounded exactly like Fog on the Tyne, which I thought was hilarious. It might be very similar, just the first chord or two.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? Fog on the Tyne? It was a bit mediocre, but
see, that's what I'm going to have to defend because I don't think.
There's dynamics to it, and like he comes to the chorus and he does a bit more, and at one place he kind of starts belting, and I'm like, yeah, it's a bit better. I felt it was, I guess compared to the last three songs, it was better in many ways, but I did feel it was a bit. You can hear a toddler in the background.
Yeah.
Right, come on.
Bye. Okay, so yeah.
He's very cute, but his view on music is just a little bit unsophisticated for this channel.
He does like simplistic stuff.
Yeah.
He might like some of the early stuff on the list then.
Zing! That was a zing from you, not me.
So so Longpigs, On and On. I think it's an amazing song, and the whole album is great, really, really good, and I think they are a great band. And On and On is one of these songs that so for me I had like a bad breakup. Actually, it's a bit later than Britpop, but I kept going back to that song. I was really cut up about this guy, and I'd put On and On in my room at uni. And I wish you would leave me, and then I'd put it on again, and I'd put it on again until all my friends were like, should we go in? And like, she was like, just think of that song again, So it's kind of what it reminds me of, but in a sort of kind of like I think it's a great song.
Yeah.
Kind of angsty, kind of. That's what I'm looking for.
I guess it didn't feel very angsty to me. I know what you mean, But I don't think it was bad. I just kind of, it's just personal. At some point, it's just a very personal thing, and it just didn't really click with me.
Yeah.
Which is why it's quite high, but not super high. Like, it's catchy, and if I heard it, I probably would. If I ever had the radio on, which is never going to happen, and it was on, I'd probably be like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just, I mean, let's be honest, none of these songs are like my top songs ever, but the next few, I
liked more.
I think these are like, So, the first one, I guess, I would mention here. Oh, it's hard. I'll go with Cast No Shadow because it's the one I'm most ambivalent about.
Okay.
And as someone who is not really an Oasis fan
I'm loving this. I'm loving that I've caused you a little bit of about.
Well,
Oasis.
no, I think the ambivalence. I think you'll understand. You probably might agree, even if you like the song more than I do. I don't know. I've never been an Oasis fan, but clearly Noel Gallagher had or has like a talent or a skill at something.
Yeah.
Like he has that ear for melody.
He's great. He's a great songwriter.
And like he has a knack for like lyrics, but at the same time, I never feel like he developed that talent very much. As much as like there's no reason why he couldn't have been as good a songwriter as John Lennon or just whatever you want to. I keep going back to the Beatles because of that comparison. But
as we're talking about it, I'm thinking about my favourite ever Oasis song, which isn't on any of their albums, which is probably why I didn't think to put it on the list. But it's one of the most Beatlesy. Is Whatever. Do you know? I'm free to be whatever. It starts with this really Beatlesy.
Maybe I have heard it. I don't know.
On the violin, which is just it's very reminiscent of the Beatles.
Right.
You should listen to it just in the vein of why people might say that.
Yes, yeah. I'm sure there are plenty of.
But he's a great songwriter, Noel Gallagher.
Well, I think great is a big word. Great is a big word. I don't mean that like again. I'm not trying to like put him down, but I do feel like you listen to him like this guy clearly had something that it's a good example of why he's very good and also very disappointing. Like I think of Oasis as a band who had a 15-year career maybe or something. It wasn't quite 20 years, was it?
It wasn't as much. They broke up pretty. It's more like a 10-year career.
Was it on and off at some point? I don't know. They probably
it's probably about 10 years before the brothers just kept,
Right.
But it was very like, I mean, there's some amazing like statistics about the rise of their, so from like Definitely Maybe through to them playing Nebworth, like this huge gig was like less than 2 years or something. It was just like meteoric, is that the word I mean? Rise to fame. And then it quite quickly after those two albums,
But I'm pretty sure the rest of them were still like platinum albums.
Yeah,
but maybe not to the point of 20 odd million. But I do feel like
definite good 10-year career.
Yeah. I remember hearing it was maybe one of their last albums.
And they do stuff separately now. So
but that, the importance of being idle, and I was like, this is just like you're doing the same thing that you've been doing for a long time. He got maybe not a very long career, but a whole career with that band out of not very many musical ideas. And this song's a good example of that because there's like 3 musical ideas, 2, and it goes on for 5 minutes. That like, right. I listen to songs that are like 23, 24 minutes long. That song is too long. That song I got once I'd listened to it a few times and I listened to it again. I got to the halfway mark where there's like a little middle bridge kind of thing. It's even a bridge, but it's like a bit instrumental. And I'm like, fade out. You just fade out the song here. This is where you fade out the song. But he doesn't. He literally repeats all the exact same lyrics again. And I just like, I don't know, like.
So what did you like about the song? Why?
But again, like he and this is. It's a good melody. It's a good song. It's a composed song as opposed to some of the first few that I mentioned. And whether it's my personal aesthetic or style, they have a style and a thing. There's something wall of sound about like that production. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's weird. Like,
in a good or do you mean that as a good or bad thing?
Well, as a thing, it's a thing, isn't it? And sometimes I really like that kind of wall of sound production. Sometimes I don't. But it's a thing. It's a very concrete thing where, and I think there's an artistry behind it. I was talking to Karen about it. Like Oasis, musically, are in a weird middle ground where they're like down to earth rock band, but they're not. They don't sound fun. They're not like an energetic party band. It's a weird mix. And again, like sometimes I find that a bit frustrating because they can seem a bit po-faced, but at the same time, it's a thing. and there's a reason they are such like cultural icons.
Yeah.
And I think that's, even if it's not necessarily my personal thing, I know that, like, listening to this song, actually, I like it, and it's got that vibe, which is a vibe I sometimes like.
Okay,
it's hard to express what I'm saying.
And
at the same time, sorry, I was going to say, he has a way with words of, not necessarily the most lyrical or sophisticated lyricist or whatever, but he usually comes out with like a nice phrase that just sounds cool.
Yeah.
Like Wonderwall, to be fair, actually is the name, was it George Harrison's first solo album or something like that?
Oh, okay.
That's where that comes from.
Right, I didn't know.
But like Don't Look Back in Anger, it's just...
Yeah.
Even if I don't know what that song means, but
that
it's a great little...
Yeah.
And Cast No Shadow, I think as a chorus, like the lyrics...
Yeah.
I think... But this is where I'm also ambivalent about the lyrics. It's also pseudo-intellectual, pseudo-profound bullshit.
So that's why I'm sort of quite surprised to hear you say that, and it's really interesting to hear, because you're right. It's both, isn't it? There's a catchy bit in there, but it is also. I mean, one of the songs I love on that album, the last one, is Champagne Supernova.
Yeah, I know that one.
The Champagne Supernova. It doesn't mean a thing, and so I kind of thought that the lyrics would really put you off, but in a way I suppose what you're saying compared to some of the early ones like by the Fuzz is that they're making more effort, like there's something that he's trying to do, even if it is, you know, intellectual bullshit.
But it's hard to get the line right, isn't it? Because I mean, I don't think people care, do they? In a way, it's not. And I think people can be a bit too obsessed with like songs really have to be so meaningful and deep, and I like good lyrics, but good lyrics don't always mean meaningful and deep. It's just they work for the song, and they do something to you.
They kind of conjure up something.
Yes, and that's why, like, I don't doubt in my mind that I googled the song and just kind of looked on forums what people thought. It sounds like there's tons of Britpop fans who think this is the most profound thing ever, which I think is hilarious, and it kind of feeds into my idea of a lot of Britpop fans being a bit obnoxious. But it's also I don't know what Noel Gallagher thought of the song.
Did you discover in the forums what it's about?
No.
So it's about Richard Ashcroft, who's the lead singer from The Verve.
No, I did read that briefly, but I didn't really have a concrete picture of what it was. I think he just said it was about.
Yeah. So he's quite a figure in Britpop, and he is Mancunian. I'm gonna say that with much confidence. I'm pretty sure he's Mancunian. And The Verve, I didn't put them on here, but obviously they're another band of that time who, they could very much have been on that list. They're another band, and they are probably a band again that people get more like super fan about and probably defend a bit more and don't write off as Britpop. Britpop.
I mean, they clearly are. I mean, they definitely are.
Yeah, they definitely are.
I don't know much about the Verve.
I'm not a massive fan of The Verve, but they've got some,
I know the big song.
Yeah.
And I cannot believe that the songwriting credit for that were credited to Mick Jagger.
Yeah.
It's completely unfair. It's a perfect example of the complete bullshit to do with music.
He wrote just the
guitar line.
Yeah.
Well, the orchestrated line in. It's not even that. It's not even that close. I think. I don't think it's close enough to have like a legitimate case there. Is it For the Last Time by the Rolling Stones? I think that's the song.
Can't remember which one it is.
But anyway, it's kind of a side note. But
So that's what the lyric. So that's probably why a lot of people. This is the most profound thing. It's about Richard Ashcroft, who's another like indie darling. Kind of.
So Britpop was maybe the last kind of movement where there is like a mythology around it, and this song is a perfect example, because this is about Richard Ashcroft, who is seen as a kind of messianic figure. Even I know that as someone who is in that part of generation. And like when he kind of came back, and did he have a solo album like maybe 10 years?
Just shit.
And I remember just being like, why do people like? What's the big deal about this dude?
Was bad. I still, as a very like open lover of Britpop, I'm not even sure. I don't really get what the big deal is, but I think there's something about him. You know, and the early Verve stuff's great, but
so it kind of feeds into that. The thing about Oasis, they more than any of those other bands, and maybe it's because they were the biggest, they're the ones who are most mythologized. But in the same way that like you can't help, and again the Beatles comparison, that's why John Lennon is so much cooler than Paul McCartney, because there's the mythology around John Lennon. Yeah. And it does, like, and you can't help but have that feed into how you listen to the music.
Yeah. And
I think I can't help it myself. I try to be as objective as possible, but Paul McCartney is still an annoying little twerp. In spite of the fact he's a much nicer person, obviously, than John Lennon was. But I can't help but have that, because John Lennon is an icon. And Oasis are an icon. And I have to say, I think I can't help though. At the end of the day, I still can't help but the overwhelming thing is disappointment with Oasis because Noel Gallagher had the talent to be something a bit more.
That's interesting. I never thought of it like that before, but I think it's a fair criticism.
Yeah,
I don't think it develops much, and
yeah.
And
I think this is where the comparison with T-Rex is probably closest because the music is much more like T-Rex than the Beatles for the most part, and it is that simple, like similar guitar tones, just very similar kind of like straightforward rock and roll. And T-Rex, I love their stuff, but. And maybe it's something to do with Meteoric Rise because T-Rex got so huge
Did they?
so quickly.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean they had like 5 number ones within a year or something, something crazy.
Yeah.
And then I mean they were only really big for like 3 years, 2.5 years maybe tops. And for the rest of their career, like Mark Bolan could just never actually develop into something else. He kind of tried it a bit, but for some reason never really seemed to push it musically. It just.
But it's interesting to think about whether that's effort or whether it's talent, isn't it? And I think the thing about Noel Gallagher and those guys, they weren't like, you know, musically trained people. He's just that gifted songwriter. And if you have
but what is
talent,
musical
like,
trained? What, like,
you can learn. I mean, maybe it's. Well, I would say what it is what the thing about practicing music is that you're not just practicing the same thing again, you're pushing yourself, aren't you? Yeah. And the thing about musical training, if I was talking about from my point of view, is being pushed to do more and do harder stuff and practice different harder stuff all the time. And you, I don't think, had like much classical music training.
No, I didn't really.
Because of your personality, I think you're someone who does push yourself. I'm going to try this, I'm going to play something more difficult, I'm going to play something more difficult. And that's where training comes into it. And that's, if you like, the privilege, I think, of kind of middle class bands over working class bands. Or, you know,
I don't think it's entirely fair. Like, because again, like, progressive rock, one of my favourite genres, was always maligned as just a bunch of posh boys. And it was just like, no, so many of them were working class.
Yeah, but
and like some of them, like, they just like had a guitar, like just like anyone else of their generation, like had a guitar and a terrible radio. And it's just
maybe the class thing is unfair. I'm not saying that like being musically trained, but what I mean is to some degree, if you're kind of classically trained or musically trained or whatever it is, you've had lessons, you're always being taught to push yourself, aren't you?
Yeah.
And so bands from all walks of life can do that, but I think I would agree with you that Noel Gallagher isn't pushing himself. He's not kind of developing that. He's got this raw talent, and that's what you hear time and time again. And actually, raw talent is something that you can train for bloody years and never have that level.
But even that, like raw talent, like was he born like that, or did he just?
I think so. I think
I don't know.
Like that is a gift, personally.
I don't know. It's hard to, like, who knows how he practiced when he was a kid.
Yeah.
And he clearly listened to the right stuff. Yeah. What I would call the right stuff, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't want to be too negative about it, but I do have that ambivalence with all Oasis stuff. Yeah. And this song, in a way, is a perfect encapsulation of all the good things about them and all the less good things.
I'm pleased to hear that you liked it. Like, I guess I would have thought, you might have just not liked any of it at all. But it's interesting you're saying it's got merit, but you've also got your reservations.
There's a few like niggly things as well where I'm just like, dude, you should have done, like, starts. Dun, 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 dun. It's the same Wonderwall rhythm, and again, like once I just start hearing the same rhythm over and over again, I'm just like, dude. But the rest of the song isn't like that, really.
Yeah, it's a good.
Because it's got that wall of sound thing, and then it starts off as a little bit of slide at the beginning. Yeah. It's buried. It's completely buried. And I was like, it's just. It's such a tiny thing. Like when I first started playing slide guitar, I literally just do it for like a bit of texture, just like sliding into one note, and it just. That tiny thing just adds so much, and if that was just a bit higher, because I think it is all the way through, a little bit higher in the mix or something, it just adds so much more to me. And those tiny things where I'm like, dude, you could have just done that, and I think it would have added quite a lot.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think this comes back to like, he had that talent, and he just kind of, I think he's on automatic to some degree.
Yeah.
Like he's almost just shitting a good song. He's just like casually like, you know. Yeah. I was like, yeah, but you could have worked on it just a little bit more, or you could have just done these few things slightly different. Yeah. Just putting the slide higher in the mix throughout the whole song wouldn't turn it into the best song ever. But do you know what I mean? It would be enough for me to be like, I like it. It's just enough. And you know what I mean? Sometimes it sounds like I have a very like narrow view of what I like, but sometimes it's the tiniest things where you're like, if you just change that, the dynamics can really just.
Yeah.
And it's a shame that I don't know why it didn't happen, because he clearly thought to add the slide.
Yeah.
And then just bury it.
The production must come in at some point as well.
Yeah, right? But I mean, he's ultimately in the driver's seat, isn't he? So he's I mean, I'm not sure if he was the producer, but he's the CEO of Oasis, I guess. But interestingly, I always wondered, and I looked this up recently, like why did he keep Liam in the band so long? Like he's clearly toxic and shit. And I found out that Noel was the last addition to the band. It was Liam's band, and I was like, well, they're lucky they got his brother on board.
And Liam, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, in the kind of pretty boy thing, you know, the image, all that stuff in Britpop is really important. And I think his voice works with it. I think, you know, I like Liam's voice. I think he is a twat, isn't he? And there's only so much you can take of his style of singing. But I think it works. I think for Oasis, it works.
Yeah, you know? He's a bit sneering.
Yeah,
and I don't mean that just in the like he's a bit nasally, but he does sound. It sounds a bit nasty. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I do like some singers who sound like that as well. And again, that's kind of a summation of my opinion of Oasis.
Okay, so who's next?
I can't remember now. I'll go to Smile now.
Okay, so it's done quite well. This is a song where Rich was like, you put that on the list, like what are you doing that for? That's shit. And I'd have to say I threw it on there as like a bit of a like, you know, I really like it. I think it's a really catchy song, but I threw it on there as more of an example as the sort of you know, the kind of middling stuff that was kind of swilling around, if you like.
Which is, I think, is totally fair in a way, and it did kind of trigger me immediately because it's like I don't think the lyrics are alright, but when it starts off, every silver
lining has a cloud.
Yes, and the second line was every good deed.
Each piece of good fortune must be paid for by the pound.
I mean, it's really just cliched. Okay, they're subverted cliches, but in a way, it's just cliches. And I did think it was a bit on the nose of like that British invasion kind of stuff. I mean, the end of the chorus is literally just with a little help from my friends. You know that. And I was like, I know that. But as soon as the chorus hit, I was like, I know the song. And in my mind, it's just kind of one of those 90s songs that was used in lots of adverts because I've heard it so many times and I don't know what. But I think it did annoy me a bit more at first, and then the chorus came on. I was like, no, I do like the chorus. I've heard the chorus. Yeah. And the more I listened to it, I was like, it is actually the chorus is deeply sarcastic. Yeah. Obviously. Yeah. And when you've just heard the chorus in adverts, that's not how it's used. It's actually used as a genuine expression of like smile. And then you listen to the song, you're like, no, that's pretty sarcastic. Yeah. And then I actually started to appreciate the fact that it just sounded like a 60s ripoff a bit more, because 60s music is obviously like the Beatles, the Kinks, whatever, the Beach Boys, is associated as being like sunshiny, happy music, which is not fair. It's a lot more
but there's some of that.
There is also some of that as well. And this song is really taking that cliched 60s and it's turning it on its head and being deeply sarcastic. And like, it's not the most amazing thing in the world because it doesn't take much to subvert a cliche. Yeah. But it's not a badly written song. It's a good melody. Yeah, it's got a jaunty little rhythm that goes all the way along.
They weren't really heard of at all after that hit, really. I think as well was another reason I put it on there as an example of
what were they called again?
The Supernaturals. I don't even really know anything about them. But I guess I think of them as one of those bands that, you know, came and went with a single indie hit that, you know, but I think it's a good song. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it's less good than the Oasis one, but because I'm less ambivalent about it, I think I would just put it ahead of it.
Yeah. Okay. So how many have we got left? How many have we got left on your list?
Got two.
There are only two left. Wow.
So the next one was To The End by Blur.
Oh, great, yeah.
And interestingly, as soon as I hear the intro, I was like, this doesn't sound like the Beatles. It doesn't sound like the Kinks. This sounds like Pet Sounds.
Yeah.
It sounds, the instrumentation on that album, on that song is...
Yeah, you're right. I'd never thought about the Beach Boys, but you're right.
It's Let's Go Away for a While, the first instrumental track on Pet Sounds, is remarkably similar. And again, I'm not accusing it of being a rip-off because it's clearly...
No, you're right. They're really similar.
It's clearly trying to like evoke that loungy... Yeah. I mean, I've said this before about Pet Sounds. It's a great album, but the instrumentation is very, on first listen especially, very like... It's almost like easy listening, laid back... loungy. It's quite cheesy in a way. Yeah. I don't think that's necessarily very fair of it, but on first listen it sounds all like saccharine and it that bit. And that's clearly what they're harkening back to. And a listener is like, well, he's actually, again, not necessarily the highest standards in the world, but he's composed the melody, the chorus is different, the chorus goes somewhere. The voice is affected. It's a bit over the top. It's not necessarily my favorite voice, but he's doing something with it. It's like it's that theatrical nature of it that I said I like. Like he's clearly. He's not just going to the microphone and like affecting like laziness and like or just speaking, which annoys me. He's doing a thing.
Yeah. Do you know much other Blair just happened? Because
I mean I know like song 2, which is I don't think it was
Park
a big
Life?
Yeah, obviously Park Life. And she lives in a house, a very house in the country. But for my generation,
because he does do an annoying Mockney voice at times, and it did start to piss people off. It started to piss me off a bit. You know, it's just got a bit irksome. But I think I think this is their best album. They've got some great albums, but I think this is their best album, Park Life. It's got loads of songs on it and all killer, no filler. And I think he does tend to kind of sing it more. It's not got like when you get to The Great Escape, he's much more doing the like, oh, she lives in a house. You know?
Which I like that. I always like this. Again, like they're not a band I'm super into, but I like that song. Oh, and Girls and Boys.
That's
which is a bit more like
that's
electronica, isn't it?
Too,
it's kind of electric, isn't it? Yeah.
That's the opening track to.
But for my generation, Damon Albarn, how do you pronounce it?
Albarn.
Oh
no, Albarn. I've just making
a joke. He's mainly the Gorillaz. That's what he's in my mind.
Oh yeah, of course.
Everyone my age loved the Gorillaz.
This
At least
is a bit
few
like
of
the time
them.
that you guys were like Patrick Swayze, the one from Donnie Darko.
Yeah.
We're like, what the fuck? Like,
that's the thing. I don't like Patrick Swayze at all. Every time I see him, I'm like, oh. And it took me a while to work out is because I've only really seen him in Donnie Darko, where he's awful.
That's interesting in itself, that like cultural thing, because it's like I always think of Gorillaz as an after because Blair were like, but you're right. I mean, they're perfectly like. Credible band, like you could grow up with the Gorillaz and be like, they're great band.
And again, I wasn't super into them, but they were on the radio now. It was just, again, he's just a dude with a guy with a songwriting talent.
Yeah.
And no one can. I don't think I think fewer people would disagree with that than if you said it about Noel Gallagher.
I think so, and I think he has really tried to push into new places. Like he's done opera, and the Gorillaz is completely different.
Although
stuff.
to be fair, no rock or pop musician should ever do opera. I've not even heard. I've not.
Pick a side early on.
I've not even heard him try to do it, but they shouldn't do it. They can do rock opera. That's fine, but it's very different.
I think it's like I say that I don't know. I'm sure there's something that he's done in that vein, but
I could be speaking too soon. Maybe he's really good at it, but I assume not.
But he is somebody who pushes himself into new genres. Who I think does try new things, works with new people rather than like same old.
And am I right to say the guitarist is Graham Cox?
Yeah.
And he now owns a dairy farm and mixed cheese. Is that right?
That's Alex.
That's the bass player.
James, he's the bass player.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're always pushing themselves into new areas. Like you got to admire that.
And Dave Rowntree tried to be an MP.
Great.
So they're all
for which party?
They're all trying Labour.
Okay, that's fine.
Because Blair were quite associated with New Labour.
Right. Yeah. Okay. But they all. I remember seeing like. Those kind of talking heads documentaries about the 90s.
Well, Britpop and New Labour get.
There was all this Cool Britannia.
Yeah, Cool Britannia.
I'm sure there's a video of like Noel Gallagher like shaking hands with Tony Blair.
Yeah, there's loads of that. Yeah,
it's so weird.
Yeah. They were seen to go together, and we had a great time. We get nostalgic about the 90s, but there's a lot of good, there's a lot of good stuff happening. But coming back to Blur, and interesting as well. Like the other thing about Blur and Oasis, where they were at completely different points in their careers, because. Oasis, definitely maybe was first album, and Blur had quite a few albums before Park Life, which is seen as their big Britpop.
Yeah.
That's like their fourth album, I think. And I've got some great stuff that comes before it as well, and I think changed and morphed into something different afterwards. So I think for that reason they do have more credibility musically than Oasis. People are less like happy to say they like them, but they still do get a bit of that. But you liked it. That's good.
I did like it. Yeah. I think it took me a bit more to come around to it, just because he is very. I can't even like mimic the accent, but he's laying that accent on thick, isn't he?
Yeah.
But it's composed and it's actually like I don't know. It sounds good. It actually sounds like, and the chorus goes somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily exactly what you expect. It's not it's not a song that you can just easily map out and say like.
No.
And that weird, the instrumental bit.
Yeah.
Is not what I was expecting. Yeah. It's almost like it still sounds very Beach Boys actually.
Yeah.
Well, Pet Sounds. It still sounds very Pet Sounds.
Yeah. I say, I'd never thought of that.
And it took me a second to work out what I was listening to. I was like, what does this sound like? And it's not the comparison I was expecting, but yeah. But it does lead me to make... this is a kind of general opinion about a lot of like post, I guess, from Britpop, post Britpop kind of music, and even like later wave of, let's say, progressive rock. I think the bands that actually end up being best are the ones that aren't inbred, essentially, and by that I mean the first generation of like rock musicians weren't influenced by rock musicians. How could they be? There was no such thing. And I think that's a really important part of being, not just being into rock music. Do you know what I mean? If you're just a rock musician who's just listened to rock music and that's really what you're just recycling more rock into more rock. And it's one of the main problems, is a total side note, of like modern progressive rock. Not all of it, it's totally unfair, but a lot of progressive metal, it's just rock and more rock through the prism and through like digested by another rock band to turn into more rock. But like I feel like you need something that's outside of rock to bring into it, like folk, or like, you know, something that has like a craft around it. Like blues is like, there's a craft to playing the blues. And if you're a pop or rock band who's still very pop or rock but has that kind of blues background, it could totally change what you're doing with it. And I guess it's a long way around to saying that Blur clearly are taking something from outside or before rock properly. And it is that kind of like, on this song specifically, there's a loungy kind of lounge jazz kind of feel, or that exotica thing that was big in like the 50s and stuff. And it
just makes it a bit more interesting.
It's in a way it's a small thing, but you can I don't know how to explain it. You can tell like it's been taken seriously. And I think that makes a big difference. And again, like, come back to the ambivalence of Oasis. It just sounds like rock that has just been chewed up and digested the third or fourth time. Do you know what I mean? It's like we're getting a little bit inbred here. Like we need to bring some more nutrients from outside. And I think that's probably, I mean, that is why I guess like Nirvana was so huge, that they did sound totally fresh. Do you know what I mean? They didn't just sound like
because
it didn't just like, it wasn't that 80s glam metal, which was just 70s rock with more makeup.
There's also something, and I was thinking about this when I read that Landfill Indie thing earlier, there's something about passing the test of time, isn't there? That if you do just recycle stuff, you can be loved in the moment and part of a scene and played in a club and people dance to it and always have fond memories of it. But you may not be like, you know, history may not be so kind to you. Whereas if you are doing something original, and you're probably going to like last the test of time better, because it's always going to be there if it's not just kind of copied and not just derivative. So I think for me it's why a band like Blur, like they'll stand, like they'll last. You know, whereas I think for me, I do feel like definitely maybe in Morning Glory is like me being 15, 16, having a great time, great songs, you know. There's something about
I totally get that.
Blur, I think I do think they're
originality.
I like them more as time's passed.
Originality is a weird question, because really there's no such thing as originality. Really, you're just taking it from. Originality is really just stealing lots of things and combining it into something new. And I think a lot, and I don't think you believe this, but a lot of people almost think it is just like you're just coming up with something completely new, and no one has ever done that. It's always like the development is more gradual than people think. And although someone like Jimi Hendrix it was like opening Pandora's box. What he was playing wasn't that different to everyone else. It's just he had a different attitude, and do you know what I mean? Like, even when you have these Pandora's box moments that seem like a complete paradigm shift, it's actually quite a gradual thing. So this is where I'll be as generous as I can ever be about Britpop, is that the comparing them to like the British invasion stuff is deeply unfair on a few kind of levels. The main one being that like it's a really fucking high standard to set a bunch of bands against, and because the Beatles and the Kinks and the Rolling Stones were the first, it doesn't matter what else anyone else is going to do. Even if they genuinely did write the most amazing album, it still would never be seen as good as that, because do you know what I mean? Because you just can't. It's just, that's the way that people work. That was the first. And
so could you, stepping outside of like the kind of historical view of it, or thinking about could you take, so if I said to you listen to Park Life, which was that song's on, it's a great album, because you've obviously, you just made a comment as generous as I can be about Britpop, which I'm kind of picking up because this is about overhated music, a little bit of kind of derision there in that statement of this is a generous.
Yeah.
Could you take a band, an album like Park Life, and just love it on its own merits, do you think? Could you listen
it's
to
still
it?
It's not really my kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's not my kind of thing. It's funny because this morning, Karen...
But I suppose what I mean, just to challenge you one more time on that, is when you say my kind of thing, it's that idea of something fitting into a genre, isn't it? And I suppose the conversation we've just had is almost saying this is doing
it's
something
nothing to do with the genre.
different.
It's nothing to do with the genre necessarily. But
so why?
But I was talking so Karen this morning was listening to Radiohead. It was Paranoid Android.
Yeah.
And I was listening to it. I was like, Karen, come on, you got to stop pretending you don't like progressive rock because this is like the closest thing you like to progressive rock.
Yeah.
It's pretty proggy.
Yeah.
And she was like,
good shout.
Yeah, just not keen. She's like, well, why don't you particularly like this if you like progressive rock? And I was like, that's a fair
really
question.
Good question.
And I was like, I think it's the flamboyance of prog. Like, it's quite flamboyant for the most part.
Yeah.
And Paranoid Android...
it's much, the aesthetic of it's much more staring at your shoes.
Yes, very shoegazing kind of thing. And to me, that is a large part of... And I do think that is a very 90s thing. We were kind of what I was saying at the start. Like, it's this kind of pedestrian, it's cool not to put too much effort in. And prog, like classic prog and Radiohead share a lot in common. Prog is like unashamedly, unabashedly a bunch of nerds who love the nerdy things and they put it right at the forefront. And I'm not saying that Radiohead aren't deeply passionate about their music. But it doesn't come across as a... Prog is goofy. I guess. But I kind of appreciate that, like, heart on your sleeve goofiness, and really had a heart on their sleeves in a different way. But I think to me, this is where Karen and I's opinions differ so much in music. Like, I love the Beach Boys and think it's genuinely beautiful. And she's like, it is just goofy though. And I'm like, it is goofy. I can't deny that, but goofy to me, I think is the easy. I get over goofiness quite easy, and I don't think people do maybe as much as I do. I don't know. There's something about I don't know how else to sum it up. There's something about goofiness.
But I just think I think for me where I feel like perhaps, and we'll come to the last song in a minute, but where I feel like this has failed a bit is I think I really want you to take one of those albums on the list. Actually, there's 2 more songs on the list. I want you. So in fact, we should move on because we're in danger of like creating a 4-hour podcast. But no, we're fine. We're good. But what I would really like, what would be a win for me out of like you listening, would be to take one album and be like, I just really like this album, whatever it be, and I like it on its own merits, and it doesn't matter that it's not this and this. I just.
I mean, you make it sound like a tick, like
I suppose
a checklist. But
what I don't mean, I'm probably being a bit harsh, but I suppose what I'm saying is that, I guess what I'm saying is it would. I wanted to find one of these albums where bands where you'd be like, I love it.
So the next one is probably the main contender.
Okay, cool.
Which is, what's it called? The song.
Is it the Suede or the Pulp one?
Have we not talked about the Suede one?
Yeah.
Oh, I probably should have already, but it's up there actually. The Suede one is right. Talk about Suede. There's 2 more, relatively quickly. I don't want to go forever with this, but Suede, Stay Together. I think it was one of those songs that I was like, this is really not quite for me, and it's still there's something about his voice where it's still not really like sitting right with me. But there's something, and again, there's something about on the negative side again. There's like the vocal melody of the verse does just kind of follow the guitar riff, and again, I'm not usually keen on just everyone doing the same thing. It kind of comes back.
He's playing around it a bit. And Bernard Butter is like a very loved guitarist.
So they're like minor negative points, but actually the song has drama, like real drama going to the verse and the chorus and like progressing through it, and has real sense of dynamism and direction. Lyrically, I can't even remember the lyrics. I can't even pretend to like take a notice of them.
Stay, these days are ours. I think it is. Stay together.
Yes, there you go.
Under the sun. Under the sky.
And it's very good at evoking something. It's very hard to like articulate what it's evoking, but that's probably why it is good. The best songs you can't really quite articulate what they're doing, and that's why they do what they do so well. I mean, if you could easily articulate what a great song does, you wouldn't need the song. Do you know what I mean? So it's doing, and it is.
And Suede are one of these bands, sorry to interrupt, who are they are one of the bands people would often, and they're not Britpop, you know,
Right,
because
right.
a lot of my male friends, and I probably have more male friends who are into music, but you know, a lot of, especially male friends, bloody love Suede, you know.
Right.
Rich, Jake, you know, loads of the guys I have friends with, they absolutely love Suede and would defend them really in a way that they probably like Blair too still, and think they but probably wouldn't passionately be like
right.
you know, whereas Suede get, you know, and and they are, you know, Richards as well, you know, they are they're also a genuine, like, sort of humble beginnings kind of band.
Right.
And Rich famously to me met Bernard Butler in a loo once, and Brett not Brent, he met Bernard Butler, and Bernard Butler said to Rich he had charisma, so that's like, you know, Rich doesn't show off about it, but it's like, you know, but you know, Rich is a huge Suede fan, and they'd definitely be a band that you know, be worth listening more, I'd say, along with Blair. Really, like, good, incredible stuff that stands the test of time.
And this is the only song that I immediately thought, like, it's almost a weird thought, I guess, but like, you could hear it being done in the 70s almost by Led Zeppelin, and you could almost picture what their vision of this song would be. And this song could work in different formats. And I think for me, it's almost like it's in the form that I'm not super keen on, because it's still, to be horrible, it's still like mopey 90s music. But do you know what I mean? Like, it's still dramatic, and it's not just mopey, but like I still struggle almost to get past that. It still sounds like mopey 90s, but you could hear it being, you could easily see it being like an 80s power ballad or like a late 60s psychedelic song. And it's strong enough compositionally to be any of those things. So it's clearly a really good song. And he's not necessarily my kind of singer, but he's clearly a good singer. And again, he's got his own thing.
Cool. So Pulp, at the top of your list then?
So I guess I didn't necessarily think about it at the time, but now we've just talked about how much I love goofiness. This song, it kind of goofy. It's unabashedly so, and like, some of the other songs, I don't know. A lot of, like, again, in Britpop, in my mind, it does feel sneering, and it's got that kind of like we're cool kind of vibe, and this is just not. He's just not engaging with that kind of cool at all. He's just like, he just is him. He's just him.
100%.
And I really like.
And also an icon. We were talking about icons earlier. You know, he is an icon.
And in spite of what I said earlier about, like, I do like musicians to go to the stage and not have a persona necessarily, but like to be like, right, we're playing music and we're not just, I'm not a singer who just speaks. I do like authenticity. And he's clearly really authentic. And you can, it's like, it's really impressive when you can hear the wink in someone singing. Like, it's hard to explain, and obviously to some degree I'm reading into it, because you can.
But no, you're absolutely right. He has got that, you know. Completely, he's got that. It's even hard to describe. There's just that quality with him, something different, something unique. I think something original.
And it's weird that,
with
like,
the tunes to back it up as well.
It's weird that I can't quite pin down like what the actual musical backing was doing, but again, it feels quite loungy, lazy, schmaltzy. That has got a loungy, lazy thing to it. And it just sounds like it's really been pitched perfectly, like, and there's nothing else really to say. He's just I think what I really, really love most of all in music, and I think most people would agree with this, is that maybe not, I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but like when a song just kind of encapsulates a thing, and it's just a brilliant version of that, whether it's an emotion or like a story or whatever, and it does that. And this is like back to like the Beatles. My problem with Paul McCartney, there are so many songs where I listen to him, like, I didn't really, like, it's a brilliantly written song, but I didn't really get anything from it. I don't know really what it is.
What am I supposed to take away from it?
And I don't mean like intellectually or whatever, or lyrically, just like on an emotional level, it doesn't really hit me on anything. It's just like, you know, fucking Paul McCartney's whimsical ditties. They're the prime suspect in this. They're really brilliantly written from a technical point of view, but I just feel empty at the end of it. Whereas John, even if in many ways wasn't as technical a songwriter as Paul, and I don't think he was as good a multi-instrumentalist, whatever, John always had, I didn't know him obviously, but he always seemed to have that in mind with every song, like, this song does. It's just, like, if it's something like political, philosophical, like Imagine, and again, I'm not someone who's like, oh, it's a really deep song, and you know, people should really listen to that message. I'm not one of those people who thinks that about music, but it's a good expression of how he feels.
Yeah.
And that's what I really like. I think that's the best thing you can do with a song.
And I think Pulp do that.
Pulp do that.
They do that time and time again. Yeah. They do that with
Common People's the most famous example,
Yeah.
and it's a bit more sarcastic, but it's still super playful.
Yeah.
And there's a wink in there,
Yeah.
and I like
Yeah,
that, and I think that's a really. And when someone can combine that with the technical part of songwriting, that's where the best songwriting is, I think.
Yeah.
And this song's still quite new to me, so I can't tell you where it'll be in a year, like how I feel about it. But Pulp, it's the one I think you've sent me this song before in our first podcast.
We were talking about like
sexy, unsexy songs.
Like getting proggy with it.
Yeah. So I probably listened to it very vaguely at the time and just didn't pay that much attention. But it is like. Yeah. And again, I don't pay super close attention to lyrics, but it is a song where the lyrics really do contribute. Yeah. Because they have to, because of what he's singing about.
And I put it on the list because we did talk about Fuzz, so that's as good as any to put on the list.
Yeah.
I mentioned it. But there's, the whole album and, a lot of Pulp stuff is really, it's great. And, this album, the album after it, His and Hers, before that, but This Is Hardcore after that, great album. So definitely would say go listen to some more because it's great. Yeah,
and it definitely doesn't feel. Maybe it's because they weren't super big. It doesn't feel.
They were actually pretty big, like.
But I mean, they weren't Oasis big, were they?
No, true. I don't know what they obviously weren't Oasis.
And I'm speaking as someone who like. My exposure to that generation of music would be through what was being played on the radio or TV, like 5 or 10 years later.
Little Meet Up in the year 2000.
Oh yeah.
And Common People, those are their biggest two hits.
But maybe from a personal perspective, they don't feel as tied to the 90s.
Right. Yeah.
And I think their sound does help with that a bit.
Yeah. They're also a band who had had quite a history leading up to it, being together for a really long time.
Yeah.
And then again, he's gone on to do quite different stuff. So.
What has he done?
So he did solo stuff for a while, and I mean he had a show on Six Music, so he's.
I knew he was on like a radio. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's quite a sort of curator. So he's curates festivals and does other stuff like that. But
so as someone who doesn't listen to the radio, it sounds like it's almost like a good sign that he's like just being a DJ or whatever on the radio, because it just sounds like he's really into music, and being a DJ, like. I've not listened to his show. I presume he doesn't just talk about himself all the time. No. Like you have to be someone who's genuinely into lots of music. Yeah. And that's a great sign. Like he's clearly passionate about music.
Yeah.
And whereas, again, like the ambivalence when it comes to Oasis,
you can't necessarily.
I think Liam's probably more about Liam than he is about music as a whole.
Yeah. I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah.
I think he's more about Liam than he is about anything else.
Yeah.
But I think it's a fair summation.
Well, that sounds like a really good note to conclude on, because we're basically saying it's all about the music, man.
Yeah, I think so.
We've turned into those people.
Well, thanks for listening to it and giving it your time and consideration. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It went on for a bit longer than I thought it would. I had more to say than I thought I did. And it wasn't all snarky. Please, I didn't want you to know that.
Come across like that about it at all. No, not at all. Not at all.
I want to be honest to say the bits I don't like, but at the same time, like, there's no point just dicking on things I don't like. And I didn't, even the ones I didn't like, luckily they were short enough as well. And
they are quite short.
Yeah. But good note to end on. Thank you very much.
Good. No, thanks.